We're live.
We're live. Hey, we're live. Hey, and welcome to the Comix Experience Book Club for the June 2016 for Dark Knight, a true Batman story. I've written it enough times I should be able to just remember how to do it. And with our special guest, Paul Dini. Thank you so much for coming. Woo! We've got a full house today. It's literally standing room only here in the store, which this is I think the most people we've had to a book club meeting yet. So that's pretty exciting for me. And I want to especially thank you because this caps the first year of the book club. This is our 12th of 12 books, and I could not be happier to have this as our book. For those of you who do not know, which I expect is really none of you, Paul is a 7-time Emmy winner. I'm doing this from memory. A 2-time Eisner, 2-time Harvey, 3-time Writers Guild. No, two-time Writer Guild, and 3-time Annie winner, which is kind of the coolest of all of them. Does it,
only 5 Emmys.
Yeah, only 5 Emmys.
No,
oh, okay. Well, still
yeah.
a bunch of Emmys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does an Annie Award look like a Harold Gray drawing, or no?
No. It's actually a zoetrope. And it spins. It's actually really cool looking. Yeah, very nice looking award.
Nice. So a long and storied career. You guys probably know him quite well from Batman the Animated Series. He's the co-creator of Harley Quinn. He has written so many comics we can't even start. And now this very special book, an autobiographical book about a very trying time in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was tremendous. Yes, do you guys agree? Yeah. This is the first autobiographical book that we've done in the club, and hopefully that didn't.
True.
What?
Using Isley.
Oh, that's true. No, you're right. Okay, right. You're sorry. I'm sorry. It's the second one. Okay. All right. Still, I hope that you guys were not thrown by the subject matter. Was it what you expected? Did you like it? It was great. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So we'll do a little. I'll do a little asking some questions here for first half, and then we'll turn it over to the audience because I'm sure you guys have way more questions than I do. I also want to remind those of you who are on the live stream, go ahead and ask your questions, and we will get them asked for you as it goes along. Okay. So I think the place that I might want to start is your animation career, and you worked on Tiny Toons, you worked on Batman the Animated Series, and speaking as a child who grew up in the 80s, cartoons really sucked before then.
Yeah, it kind of did.
Yeah. So what was the magic that happened at the Warner Studios to be able to make cartoons good again?
Well, it was kind of a perfect storm of things all coming together at once. During the 80s, a lot of the people who went on to create Tiny Toons and Batman and a lot of those shows were just out of school, and everybody was thirsting for the chance to really make some great artwork. And there was a big gap between the old timers who were working on the Disney and Warner Brothers stuff and then the new guys coming up in the 80s, because there was almost like animation skipped a generation. So you had studios like Hanna-Barbera and Filmation and Ruby Spears and a few others that were starting in the late 70s, early 80s, and they were taking kids right out of school, men and women who just wanted to make cartoons, and some, it was their first job. I started working when I was like 21, and we all just wanted to do cartoons. And the only place to do it was Disney, and they made a movie every, 4 or 5 years, or Saturday morning. So you had people going into the Saturday morning, kind of the hack houses, who just wanted to make their version of Snow White or Pinocchio or the Great Piggy Bank Robbery, all the great cartoons. And it was frustrating to have all this talent just kind of retracing the same stuff over and over again, because at that point Saturday morning cartoons were really kind of at a low point. But it was a good place to break in. A lot of the old directors were still alive, so for a while you still had Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, a lot of the Disney animators still alive and vital in the business, or even though they were getting ready for retirement. So the young people were able to talk to the old people and gain a little wisdom from them. And we all thought, someday we want to make our cartoons. We want to make, some really great stuff. And it looked kind of dismal at that time because there wasn't a lot going on. I mean, there are shows that people remember, like Masters of the Universe and Transformers and some of those shows which were fun, and we all worked on those to some degree. But it wasn't until right around the time they made Roger Rabbit that there was really this resurgence in animation. And Steven Spielberg really, I have to credit him with a great deal for this animation renaissance, because he loved cartoons. He really wanted to make the Roger Rabbit movie. He got that made, and once that was a big success, then it got easy. Then Little Mermaid came out, then the great Disney movies of the 90s, like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. Everything all sort of happened at once. And in television at that time, Matt Groening had brought The Simpsons to primetime, so suddenly primetime animation is back. It hadn't been around since the Flintstones, really. And it became hip, and it became viable as a medium for which you could tell stories and more adult stories. And around that same time, you had things like the Disney Afternoon, where they were in syndication with their shows like DuckTales, and Warner Brothers wanted to be involved in that, and they had a really good relationship with Steven Spielberg. He wanted to create like a new generation of Looney Tune characters to stand with the old ones, so that's how Tiny Toon Adventures came to be. And Warner Brothers was sort of dormant at that time. They were doing a little bit of new animation for the Bugs Bunny and Daffy movies, not really a lot of the old full animation, but since Steven wanted to get involved again, suddenly Warner Brothers became very vital again, and they began staffing up, and the staffs consisted of people who'd been in animation for about 8 or 10 years, like myself, and people who were right out of art schools. So you had this whole new young generation coming in and saying, okay, we want to make our crazy cartoons. And Tiny Toons was really a great time of experimentation. Some of the cartoons were great, some of them not so great, but everybody put a lot into them. And not only were things going great over at Warner Brothers, but that also sparked things over at Nickelodeon. And you had things like Doug and Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy. And you had, and then that led to things like Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. So one thing kind of sparked a lot of other things, and suddenly animation was back as a very viable art form, not only for television, not only for the so-called kid audience or the Saturday morning audience, but also in films, because that's when the Disney movies started making incredible revenues, and suddenly everybody wanted to be in the animation feature business.
Yeah, it really kind of amazes me how you went from, animation at a time that was, I remember a lot of the cartoons in the 70s and the 80s just being no movement and just,
yeah.
But then all of a sudden they look spectacular.
Yeah. Suddenly the shackles were off. We were gotten encouragement, we got money, we had people interested in really doing terrific cartoons again. And Saturday morning was dying and falling by the wayside. And all through the 80s, we had to deal with the networks and deal with censors and what was appropriate for kids. And nobody ever really considered animation as being a viable entertainment form for anybody over the age of 7 or 8 years old. Sure. Or if it was a vehicle for selling toys and breakfast cereal and things like that. I can still remember going to a party once around 92 or 93, and it was just a bunch of guys having a party, but for whatever reason, everybody in animation showed up there. It was sort of like this one perfect party that even now a lot of people remember. So it was guys like Ralph Bakshi and Bruce Timm and John Kricfalusi and myself and a whole legion of Disney people. Rich Moore was there. Brad Bird was there. Just a bunch of people who all got together one night who were all jobbing around LA at the same time. And even at the time, I was looking around, and a lot of people I was working with, and I'm going like, boy, there are a lot of people here who are going to go interesting places, and they all did. So it was a very good time. And right around then is when Pixar started rising and started gathering people to make their first movies and things like that. So it was just like a blessed time. And now here we are 20 years later. And the young kids of that time are the kind of the established older guard, and happy to be working and still continuing to make some fun stuff.
Do you, from your point of view as a writer, is there any difference between traditional hand-painted, hand-drawn animation and computer-generated that we have today?
Well, it's still a story. It's still a way to tell a story. So as a writer, it doesn't make that much difference to me because most of my work is done early on with the director and plotting out what the story is going to be. And then I'll go off and write a script, or else I'll write the script in segments and come in and work it through with him. And so as I don't draw it, it doesn't really matter if it's CG or traditional animation. I know at a studio like Pixar, they do a lot of the writing, the story work themselves. They do it the traditional way that they've always done it at like the Walt Disney Studio, where they all work on the story, and the director and the story people, who are also the artists, pin it up and work out the story on storyboards. And if a writer is needed at all, he comes in later to craft a script out of the story elements. So when I work on a feature, usually it's for traditional hand-drawn animation. I love hand-drawn animation because I think it captures the life and a sense of humor to the characters that CG is only starting to do now. In some of the Pixar movies and some of the Blue Sky movies, you find that sort of rival the acting in the classic Disney movies, but there's a magic to just a few quick pencils that a computer has not been able to capture yet.
I was thinking more in terms of, you know, we used to always say about comic books, one of the reasons that comic books were better than movies was that there was no budget. It didn't really matter, you know. You could say, you know, 10,000 alien spaceships come, you know, and you just had to draw it. It wasn't that hard, you know. It's not, you didn't have to film that. It strikes me that with CG, you can kind of do that. It's cheaper, right? I mean, you can clone elements, or am I wrong about, you know, about that?
It depends. It depends on what the budget allows for, and you sort of have to, like building a house, you have to sort of budget for everything and for the scenes and what it's going to entail to bring that all on screen. I remember a few years ago, I was working on the Clone Wars series, the CG Clone Wars series, and I was working on a story with some of the other writers, and the climax of the episode was going to be in the Imperial Senate, like from the Star Wars movies, where everybody's on those sort of saucers that move up and down, and you had a bounty hunter who was trying to escape, and he had a hostage, and Anakin was jumping from saucer to saucer trying to get him, and it was a very cool scene. But they just didn't have the budget they didn't have the Senate built at that point, so we had to come up with something else, or we had to work around it in some way. The verdict came back, script's great, it's a lot of fun, but we just don't have it built yet. And my response was, well, can't you use the one left over from the movie? And it's like, no, it just doesn't look the same. It doesn't, you know. It's asking the question. I knew that there was a no, but you know, you have to kind of stretch yourself and move around a little bit. It's a little more different because everything has to be built inside the computer and rendered. So in some CG shows, you have a more established look and set, and certain characters you use over and over again. And when you have to stretch it, you have to make allowances for it.
When you compare writing comics versus writing animation, do you approach them differently, I assume?
Yes.
What do you think the strengths, weaknesses of either one?
Well, like as you say, when I write comics, it's usually with one or two artists, and I call for things that I know that they are going to enjoy drawing, or they draw well, or that they will have time to render, and so you know, I work very closely with them on that. In animation, you have to keep in mind what the budget will accommodate, and also you have to be more of a director in writing for animation. You have to call the shots a little tighter. You have to use a little more detail. Where with some artists, I worked a sort of shorthand with, you know, just letting them go and do certain things. Like on Dark Knight, working with Eduardo Rizzo, I gave him very little direction as far as what I wanted as far as the visuals went. I did not want to art direct him too much. The one thing I really wanted him to stay away from was the look of the animated series for the bulk of the story, because I felt we needed a contrast between what is clearly the cartoons and the real world. But that said, I said, I don't want you to do like the Bruce Timm version of Batman that I'm speaking to. I want you to read the story, come up with a vision of Batman that makes sense for you to put in the story. The same with Poison Ivy, the same with Two-Face. I want to see your versions of these characters as pertain to the story, because you're an equal participant in this, and I want your vision on the page. And so, with very few exceptions, I just let him go and do what he wanted. And there were times when the pages came in that I felt what he had come up with was so powerful and such better storytelling than the script that I went back in and reworked the script a little bit to favor the images that he had done, or in some cases dropped dialogue and prose out altogether, because he was telling the story in such a magnificent way. And that's a kind of collaboration I really like with an artist, and that goes for comics as well as animation. There are times that I'll look at a scene in animation, it'll come out completely different from what I imagined, but the director will say, "Well, I had a lot of more good ideas, and we went this way, and suddenly it worked a lot better for us." And recently, I had a direct-to-video movie come out, and there was a character in the script that was this sort of outspoken, tough, brassy male character, and he was written that way, and he was adapted from a book where that's basically the same character. Then I was looking at the model sheets some months later, and I said, "Well, this character is now female." And what happened? The character, we adapted the book from, he's male. And they said, "Yeah, I know, but it's a fantasy character, and for whatever reason, it just made sense that it was a female character." And when I saw it animated, it was like worlds better than what the script was. The character had a life and a sense of humor to it that was different from the script, but it just worked so much better that I'm not a sort of guy who's going to clamp down on something because the director has a vision and is able to pull it off. I'm just going to say, that's interesting, let's go with it, let's see where it goes.
When you write, do you do your own thumbnails? Do you your own storyboards just for your own sake?
It depends. With action adventure, because I don't draw quite that well or in that style, maybe a little less so. But if it's a gag sequence or involves some action, I'll draw stick figures. If I'm writing something like Tom and Jerry, I keep a sketchbook with me, and I'll just I can draw a cat and mouse pretty well. So it's like I'll just draw some business with them, and that actually is helpful when I've got a sequence with them, where the action is on them, okay, what does the mouse do that annoys the cat? And the cat chases the mouse, and here's some cute stuff I can throw in there. So with funny cartoons, I always do that. I always keep a sketchbook handy because I work out bits of business or sketches for characters, things like that. I'll do it with the superhero stuff too. I did that with a story I was writing last year that I just had a bizarre idea for. It was a Harley Quinn story, and I just started sketching her, and then suddenly I'm adding all these elements to it. I'm laughing my head off. And that day I went to lunch with the producer, and I pitched him the idea, and he said, "Go home and write it." So that afternoon, 2 days later, I handed him the script, and it just, sketching prompts some good ideas. Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah.
When you guys were working on Batman the Animated Series, did you have any sense that it was going to be sort of the game changer that it was?
Well, not really, but there are some times when I'm lucky enough to work on a project where we have a collection of talent that really believes in themselves and the show and what we're doing, that they are using all their talents on it and all their enthusiasm. And it's always hard work, but in the case of Batman and on a couple of other things I've worked on, it's such a pleasure going into work that you think, if we're having this much fun with it, I'm pretty sure the audience is going to like it too. So with Batman, we wanted to tell stories that we would have loved reading as a kids or teenagers, the sort of stories that you would have not only read in a comic book, but also saved and went back to a few years later and read them the same way. We had the same sort of feeling on Lost when I was working on that show and plotting out that. We had no idea what we were doing when we started writing the show, but the more we began coming up with crazy ideas and the more we began working out what the show was going to be and all the bizarreness, we'd say around the office, this thing is either going to flop in 1 week or it'll be like Star Trek. It'll go on and have fans and people discussing the plots and everything like that. But at the same time, we just knew that we loved it. And I think that love shows through when you're working on something you really care about.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. Maybe talk a little bit about the creation of Harley.
Okay. What was that? Harley came about, kind of a bunch of things. I was writing a script called Joker's Favor, and I wasn't really even on the show full time. My contract had been up and I was off writing a movie, and Alan Burnett had taken over as the story editor and producer on Batman. And I never met him before, but he had liked some of my work. And so I did meet him. I came into the studio and he said, when you're done with this movie, is there any chance you'll write a couple of scripts for me? And I said, sure. And one of those scripts was Joker's Favor. And I started writing it. And basically the plot was, what if an innocent guy is menaced by the Joker? Let's put a guy, not Batman, not a hero, but just a common guy who'd be terrified of the Joker in proximity to him. And that was really what I was working with. And then I thought, well, if it's the Joker, he's got to have a gang, and let's give him some henchmen. Let's give him a girl, and maybe like a Girl Friday type. And I was thinking kind of like, what if she was funny, and what if she got laughs, and like she's always trying to make the Joker laugh, and what if the henchmen laugh at her jokes, and Joker has to glare at them like, don't laugh at her, laugh at me, that sort of thing. And I was also thinking of sort of the female henchman characters that you had in the live action series, where the Riddler or Joker or Penguin would have a mall with a gang. So I said, well, what would that look like now? Let's do a version of that. And so I came up with this character. I like the name Harley Quinn, and the jester motif kind of came from my friend Arlene Sorkin, who was on a show, Days of Our Lives. And there was like a fairy tale sequence where she was running around as a jester saying silly things. And I said, oh, I'll use some of that. So some of that got in there. And then once the script was done, I said, do you want to do the voice? And she said, sure. And she'd never done voiceover like that before. So she came in, and the fact that she wasn't a traditional voice actor, she brought a little bit more experimentation, a little bit of rawness perhaps, or a little bit of her style of comedy to it. And I think that really worked as far as what we were looking for in the character. And pretty much that was going to be it. Okay, Harley had her little bow, and we're not going to use her again. But I liked the character a lot, and she got a good reaction from the directors a year and a half before anybody saw any footage of her. And Bruce's design was really engaging and everything. And the other director saying, well, you're going to bring that character back. And I said, okay, not right away. But eventually we did. And the more we used her, the more everybody sort of liked her. And the more the other directors wanted to add things to her, and other writers wanted to write, stories with her. And I began discovering a few more things about the character. And then, eventually Bruce and I sat down and we worked up the Mad Love story together as a way of showing who she was and where she came from. And then suddenly we just had a breakout character on our hands. And I equate her creation to very similar to like Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny's, where, yeah, it's one guy who's responsible for the creation of, Tex Avery was responsible largely for the creation of Bugs Bunny, but then Chuck Jones got him and added so many things for his Freeling. Everybody who's got their hands on him would add something to him. So, and with Harley, it's the same way. For a long time, I was the only one who wrote her. Then she began showing up in comics, and then people began adding a little bit more to her, and then the Dodsons first, and then Jimmy and Amanda. And so she's become this sort of breakthrough icon from where she was originally. And I'm just delighted the character still exists. Like, she wasn't retconned out of existence before the start of the New 52. Right. I thought I thought she was gone for sure, because right. I heard, oh yeah, we're gonna cancel Gotham City Sirens, and we're changing the whole line. And I thought, oh, poor Harley, I hope she survives. And yeah, she actually flourished as a result. Yeah. So.
Do you? I mean, and you don't have to answer this question, sure. But what do you think of the way she looks now? Because visually, she's a very different character.
Right. Well, I always think the best look for her is the original Bruce Timm, the Jester costume. It has tremendous appeal. It's very engaging. It's innocent. It's fun, and yet it can be a little bit deadly and dark at the same time. What I call the roller girl look that she has now, that's fun too, and it's a different take, and I like it. It's like everybody takes Harley, they add a little something to it. So, and I feel like she's become the sort of template that people can use and experiment with. And I've seen everybody in costume, from steampunk Harley to prisoner Harley to male Harley to little girl Harley. She's become like Peter Pan. Anybody can be Harley Quinn, like anybody can be Peter Pan. And I love that. And I feel like, yeah, okay, so now she's got her red and black outfit from the comics, and then she's got the Daddy's Little Monster look from the movie and everything like that. But it's still okay. I mean, look at Mickey Mouse. He didn't stay the little Steamboat Willie guy forever. But on the same hand, they're doing cartoons now where he actually is. He does look like that. So you can evolve these characters, take them in different ways, and they just become a different vehicle for somebody to experiment with. And I'd rather have that attitude and welcome what people are doing with her than be, a grouchy guy saying like, she doesn't look the same. It's not my Harley, blah, 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 blah. She means so much to other people that, it's just like, take her, have fun with her. I sure did.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's go on with some comics stuff.
Sure.
You did a kind of a major departure, I think, for you working with Alex Ross on those big, oversized, the Treasury books, where they're kind of not comics; they're illustrated prose stories.
Yes,
in a large way.
Uh-huh.
What was your thinking there? What drew you to that as a way of telling those stories?
Well, those stories began with Alex's desire to go back and honor the 60 years at the time that those characters had been in existence. And we dealt with each one in sequence. So Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Shazam, Captain Marvel. And the reason we did that was to tell, and Alex's thinking on that was to tell stories that got back to the soul, the heart and soul, and the origin of those characters. So we had the big Treasury format, and Alex is painting everything. I think everybody expected, okay, here comes the big Superman Luthor story. Here's the big Batman Joker story. It's like, no, we wanted to tell stories about who they were at their core. What's the human in the superhuman, and work from that genesis. So Superman's story is very much a story about how he relates to people on Earth, and how his idealism and vision sometimes works in direct conflict with man's human nature, human in both good and bad ways. Superman is very rarely a guy who dictates policy. He's a guy who tries to be an example, and it's up to you if you want to follow his example or not. And in this situation where Superman tries to take a more hands-on approach to actually change something for the benefit of mankind, he winds up frustrated by it. And that's a very human thing. And he's got to reevaluate where he fits in and where his own humanity fits in with Earth people's humanity. And that's not the big Luthor or Bizarro story I think people were expecting to see. And Batman's war on crime is not so much the villains as it is, street level crime, how it pertains to everybody in Gotham City. Shazam was very much about, from the point of view of a child who wants to make things better, who sees things as a child even though he's adult. And it really, and Wonder Woman was, the whole spirit of truth, and coming from that point of view of a warrior who's trying to reach people with her message. And they were difficult stories to do, because the tendency is, I get halfway through and it's like, can we use Gorilla Grodd? No, you can't use Gorilla. Mr. Mix's pill? No. So it would be like, no villains. This is the human world. And it was a challenge to write those stories, but I think they worked very well, because we wanted to do it as a way of reminding people that their genesis was in very human stories. Superman was a guy who could break the law and take matters into his own hands, where Clark Kent couldn't. Clark Kent could only go so far, and at that point he had to put on the cape and become Superman and be a crusader for justice. So it was going back to those very simple things, and yet tell them in a large format to really remind people of who they were at their heart and soul.
What prompted the doing them in a prose oriented format rather than sort of traditional comics storytelling?
With that story, we wanted to convey what the thoughts of the characters were. So we wanted to have that running dialogue and not do the traditional thought balloons or word balloons. They just didn't seem to fit. And Alex, I think it worked very well as illustrated stories, much more than traditional comic book stories. When we got into Justice League, we broke it because we had so many characters, it would be almost impossible to tell a story from any one particular character's point of view. And at that point, we've got everybody together. Let's all hear them talking. Let's all have them interacting as a team. And that's the one where we shook things up a bit.
What appeals to you with the DC characters as opposed to the Marvel characters, I suppose?
Well, I love them both, and they've always had a tremendous amount of appeal for me, and I've always enjoyed reading them. I've enjoyed working on them both in the degrees that I have. DC, there's almost a sort of an innocence with them that they almost are of the stuff of legend, or almost, I hate Thomas used this term, but like fairy tale, maybe tall tale is a little bit more accurate, where the Marvel world is very much the real world. It's New York, it's present day, it's a world very much of a world that we know very well. The DC characters, it's Gotham City, it's Metropolis, it's places that are like the real world, but one's slightly removed. It's characters that are just seem to be a bit more, not as heavy as the Marvel characters, and yet that allows for a bit more experimentation, a bit more creative reinterpretation with them. Batman is a great character, for instance, a great character that you can put into a lot of different situations, and he just works. Suddenly you're telling a story in the 1930s. Suddenly you're telling a story on another planet. Suddenly you're telling a story, a dark story or a very light story. He is a great vehicle for different types of storytelling. Whereas Spider-Man I've always found to be in the here and now. You can always do there have been some great one-off stories. I read this, there was a great one a few years ago where he was sharing an apartment with the Human Torch, and it was just two dudes just annoying the hell out of each other. It was a great story, but again, that's very much the Marvel world. The DC world is just slightly skewed. It's almost like an instinctive thing, but there just seems to be a little bit more experimentation, a little more looseness of the DC world. That's, I think, what I respond to.
Do you think that the parent companies fully get that? Because sometimes I feel like Warner's really wants to put Batman in a box, whereas when I look at a cartoon like Batman Brave and the Bold, the thing that's great about it is that it embraces just the utter insanity of a lot of the situations that the Batman's in, and it works, Rainbow Batman shouldn't work at all. But that totally works if you do it with affection and love.
Sure. And it ultimately comes down to that. Like if your heart is in the right place and you match that with your imagination, you can always tell a fun story about these characters, because I think it taps in to what a lot of people think about those characters anyway. Brave and Bold is a good example. Every time I wrote a Batmite story, he was a character you'd cringe to see in a cartoon normally, but within the context of that world and kind of honoring what he is and that idea at its core, the episodes with him turned out to be a lot of fun. And it's the same whenever I write any of the DC characters. I may not write the exact version of Swamp Thing or Green Lantern that is appearing in the comics, but I'm writing a version close enough to what everybody thinks of those characters and treating with as much affection and imagination as I can, that it usually hits the target more often than not. And I'd say that's the same for a lot of the writers, both in comics and animation, who have custody of these characters.
Yeah. I just think there's a lot of joy in those characters.
Yes.
That certain interpretations don't want to embrace that joy, and it disappoints me that like a character like Superman in particular should always be light and happy, and to have angry, scowling, sad Superman just seems like you didn't get what's awesome about the character.
Well, it's when you hear a creator saying, "Well, I'm going to tell the story about Superman that should never be told." It's like, why? Why are you doing it? I mean, it's the easiest. It's the easiest story of all to write the death of a hero, because you are presuming and using that entire character's history to tell that one big finale story, and that's easy. You could do that with any character. But to paraphrase the old saying about comedy, death is easy, continuity is hard, and it's hard to do that. It's you can make the big death of the Joker story, the death of the Flash story, but how do you write a really entertaining Flash story every month? How do you take a character that's been around 50 or 60 years and shake them in such a way and find something new, find a new pairing, like let's take Flash and Martian Manhunter and put them together, and what can they bring out of each other? I never would have thought of really pairing them up, but what do we have? That sort of thing. And when you can do things like that, then you bring a whole new life to the character. And it's to me, it's much more interesting that keeping the characters alive and fresh month after month or season after season than it is to do the big, whatever my version of the Dark Knight story is, the end of Camelot, the fall of the gods, that sort of thing. That story is the easiest one in the world to write. I mean, I did it once on the show just to get it out of my system with Over the Edge, one of the Batman episodes, because this is the big death of Batman episode, and then but how do I get out of it, and how do I justify it, and how do I make it a little bit so the audience feels like they weren't totally hosed, and what do I give them at the end? And the win at the end is Gordon knows about Barbara, and that's like a legitimate win, whereas everything else is frosting. That's a little bit of cake, we sort of hung it all on.
Yeah, I just think those characters are so much better when they wink at you.
Yeah.
Like, they should be part of it,
Yeah.
You there was a period of time where you were writing a lot of comics.
Yeah.
You had 2 books a month coming out from DC.
Too many. Yeah. It was killer schedule, and it was hard keeping up that schedule. I don't know how guys like Bendis and Gail Simone do it.
Yeah.
Somehow they're superhuman in and of themselves, I guess. Bendis is writing 14 books a month, something like that.
Seems like it sometimes. Yeah. Is so the challenge of participating in an ongoing narrative that you don't actually have any control over. I find that an interesting challenge, and you were really in the thick of it for a while. Can you? Yeah.
That was a very interesting experience. And I go back and forth on it. Sometimes it was a challenge, and it was interesting to find a place for myself in a big continuing story that a lot of writers are into. On the other hand, I felt like, given my druthers, I'd just rather be writing monthly adventures of characters, because give me a character where there's not so much of a spotlight on, that I can make into kind of my own version of a star character. I'm fine with contributing elements to a big ongoing story, but let's work out what that is. If I'm going to be writing chapter 8, I really want to know what chapter 7 and chapter 9 are going to be, so I can find a way to fit in there. And I need to have access to the writers who are doing everything else around, because it's like, you can't be, you can't have a football team if 3 guys are playing soccer and there's a guy with a baseball bat and another guy's just posing for pictures. No, come on, we got to play football here. That's what we're doing. So in situations where the vision is a little more scattered, I would have some trouble with which is why I preferred when I was writing Batman to write, either one shots or short continuities. Like with Zatanna, there was a character that, was sort of like, okay, you can do what you want with it. So it's like, all right, I have my year plotted out, and here's the stories I'm going to do. And she doesn't have to be anywhere else other than, or if she's appearing elsewhere, it's not going to impinge on what I'm doing. So yeah, I prefer dealing with characters where I can just sort of have them to myself.
I think the one I might ask you about, and again, you can totally
Sure.
tell me that you don't want to have this conversation at all.
Right.
That's fine. You wrote Countdown.
Yeah.
To Final Crisis.
Yeah.
And what you were writing didn't end up connecting to what Final Crisis was.
Yeah.
So how did that? I'm literally wondering how does that happen? Is it that creators are changing their plans? Is it that editorial isn't communicating properly? Is it that you just like, no, I want to write this? How does that work?
Well, I guess the basic thing to say is things changed, and things started off, it's different than when I signed on to do Countdown. We were thinking of it more like a TV show with a set number of episodes and a showrunner and a few key writers who are going to be doing this one certain thing. And a TV show is much different than a whole publishing company because this whole organism of different things. And if you're going to set policy and say, this is going to be our universe and this is what we are doing and we're going to this way, and these are the books that tie into it, you got to have everybody in the same room and you got to have everybody on the same page, and you have to know what your end game is going to be so you can work to that. And those were things that were in infinite variables throughout, or constant variables throughout the creative processes. That we had an end game in sight, we had a general idea of where we were going with the story, but there were other elements that just didn't fit as went along. Either other editors and writers wanted to do different things, or creative teams were switching and different people were taking stories in different ways, or it just got to be
a book fell. It happens.
Oh, that's right.
We're in a bookstore. Books fall over all the time.
It just got to be, it kind of took on a life of its own. And at that point, as far as what I was doing with Countdown, it's like, okay, let's just work toward this and do the best we can and finish up the story. And the rest of the universe just sort of has to take place, take care of itself. Because when I started on, there were elements that, I didn't even know were going to factor into the story, or to what degree that my story would affect somebody else's. And again, it all comes down to communication. If you're going to tell a story that big, any story that big, you've got to have the end point pretty solidly worked out, and you've got to have all the writers on the same page and communicating with each other and saying, this is what we're doing. So, other than that, you've just got people trying their best in little areas here and there to bring some life to what they're doing. And I think that's what we had in that situation.
Yeah. Well, it almost seems like trying to figure out how Lost ties into St. Elsewhere or something.
Yeah, that was.
I mean, it could be done, but
yeah. I mean, on TV shows, you work toward, you have as everybody knows, you have individual episodes, and there's always these little threads of an ongoing arc that ends with the season finale, and then that sparks into next year. But like you said, if you've got 3 different shows on 3 different networks and you're trying to tie them all together, it ain't gonna happen. Yeah.
So you've done a number of creator-owned books as well. There's Madame Mirage, there's Mutant Texas, Jingle Bell.
Yes.
Is it easier or harder to work on an original idea than it is on something that already exists?
It's harder. It's more satisfying when you see it, because it's really a labor of love. And when you, Frank Miller told me that when you get that box and then you take out that comic, and it's something that you've created and that you've worked hard on, and you look at it, there's no better feeling. And he's right about that. On the other hand, it's like when you working on passion projects can come at a price. A lot of times people are would say to me, oh, well, I'm never going to read Jingle Bell, but I'd like to read another Batman if you write that. So it's like, okay, well, and I understand, Jingle Bell is a humor book that comes out maybe once a year, and it has a very specific audience, and it has a much softer look, and yet there is a primal love in me for funny comics, and I love characters like that, and I've got a few that are just waiting in the wings to finish them up and get them out. That people will look at this and go, like, why do you want to do a funny character like this? And it's like, because they just delight me. And I think I personally need to do that in order to keep my mental knife sharp. I just can't do the same thing over and over again. I'm in love with the process of creation, so a lot of times I'll come up with characters and I'll just hang on to them for years until I can use them in some form or another. With an existing character like a Batman or a Superman, there's so much history to draw upon and so many other characters tie into that universe that it's easy for me to come up with another Batman story, because I'll think, well, who haven't I used them? Well, Clayface. Okay, what's a good Clayface story? Okay, Clayface, two Bruce Waynes show up at a party, and the real Bruce Wayne knows that's Clayface, and what's he going to do? So it's like, okay, there's a story there. And I can work with that, and at least, and then I'm sort of, okay, I know where that would go, but where with an original character, it's a little harder coming up with something that I think, builds on what I've established with that character and is entertaining and funny. And also just the idea of, in a lot of cases, I'm asking a lot of a publisher to publish one of my humor books, because humor is not the top selling thing right now. And I don't necessarily want to, do independent publishing. So I'm very grateful for Dark Horse and Oni and Top Cow and everybody who's IDW is doing it this year, who've published Jingle Bell. Yeah.
Well, I actually kind of wanted to specifically point that out, that if you guys haven't read Jingle Bell is, if you like Harley Quinn, you'll love Jingle Bell.
It's another screwy blonde.
Yeah. And she's Santa Claus's rebellious teenage daughter. And it's funny and warm, and it's a great comic.
It's sort of fun. Like, the only kid Santa doesn't get along with is his own daughter, owing to his kind of lousy parenting skills, and his daughter has sibling rivalry with every child on Earth because her dad's never home on Christmas with her. She's off, eating some other kid's cookies and giving them gifts, and she's sitting at home. So
and you've worked with an amazing number of artists on that.
Just terrific.
It's just a murderer's row of talent. So.
Steven DeStefano, Sergio Aragones. Yeah. Oh boy, so many good people. Jay Bone. Yeah,
there's a complete edition of Jingle Bell that's coming out. I want to say September.
Yeah.
So from IDW, so keep a lookout for that.
We're just wrapping it up now.
That's me plugging on behalf of him, but it's really good stuff, and I think you'll like it a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of stories that haven't been seen in years. All the stuff's out of print, and so we're really making a nice package out of it.
Yeah. So let's talk about this book a little bit. Sure. I really felt this was a really brave thing to do. To expose yourself in this way and expose your vulnerability. And it's interesting, when we were discussing what book to pick for the book club, I was kind of like, I really like this book, but I don't know how to ask questions about this without being a bully. Because I mean, it's a really traumatic event that you went through, and so why did you want to write this story? I guess would be the first question.
Well, I think if I had written the story closer when it happened, and that's anytime, like from within the last 20 years after the events, I don't think I would have told the same story, and I don't think I could have told the story in the same way. And I felt that the person I am in that story is not the person who I am now. And it was easier for me to look back at that person and remember what I did about myself at that time, and put myself under that microscope. Whereas if I had tried doing that within a few years of the assault, it would have been much too tender, and I would have I wouldn't have been able to have looked at some of the same things that I examined in the book. But it's almost like looking back at another version of myself, like a parallel universe version of myself, and it really is the man I am there is not who I am now. And in many ways I am the same. In many ways I have, some of the same proclivities and bad habits and, and other things, but I feel like I have grown in certain ways where at least I can look back at who I was at that time and tell that story and say, this is what I went through, and this is the way I treated myself, this is what happened to me, and this is the way I looked at life, and this is how I came to change my point of view, and also and kind of yet still embrace who I was back then, because I can't divorce myself from him. But it just, the time has made me more willing to share that story and more able to tell that story. I don't want to close off things of my past, because I think if I did that, it would just fester. And I don't want to live in fear of the past. I know that other people have been through similar things, and I think by examining what I went through and putting those out there, that maybe people can find a bit of kinship in that, or recognize some of the same things they've gone through, and then look at the way they've grown, or their way they're kind of struggling to grow beyond a certain incident. So I really did kind of divorce myself from the emotion that I would have had 20 years ago if I had tried to tell a story that raw.
It's hard because, when you go through something violent like that, mm-hmm. It changes you in a way that it's very difficult to explain to other people. I was robbed at gunpoint here in the store once. Nothing happened to me. So it's not even remotely the same thing as being physically assaulted. But I know that for months, I was like, anytime I was alone in the store, I was like much more aware. I was probably scared all the time too. Yeah. And that's a difficult thing to deal with. I can't imagine that it's any easier when you've been physically assaulted.
Well, no, it was, and what made it worse at the time, and when I was thinking about it right after the assault, was knowing that the sheer joy and pleasure the attackers took in it. There was no robbery was on their mind eventually. But first, what they wanted to do was find a guy and beat him and kill him, or cripple him, or kill him. And that it was just in that moment, I was what these guys wanted to kill. Right? I was what they hated the most on that earth. And I recognized that as it was going through it. And I realized, man, it's like you strayed into bear country. There's no way out other than just to ride it through. You can't fight. You can't scream. You can't do anything that's going to acerbate or increase the attack. You just have to survive it as best you hang on. This is it. And once that went through my head, it was like survival is out of my hand. I just have to wait for a moment to where I can either get free or make my peace or something. It's just that moment where, you stare death in the face, and this is it. Maybe it's it. Maybe it's not it. I was anticipating being killed, and at that point, you just sort of, or at least I did. I just said, "No, this is it." And when I realized it wasn't it, it was almost like, what the hell do I do now? Yeah. It's like, go get to your feet and get home. Don't sit here. Don't cry. Don't scream. Don't just. Get up, go home, and tough through it, and that's what I did. It was really hard, and going out at night and never feeling like I was safe, and it was all these conflicting feelings, and the physical pain was intense, but it was just something. And at that point, I was living by myself, and I just. All through the incident afterwards, there was this feeling of finality to it, saying it's only up to you. You stay here or you go on. There's no other way. It's like suddenly you're abandoned in the desert. Are you going to sit there and die, or are you going to at least try and get up and try to get to shelter? That's what I did emotionally on that level. So.
Do you still read something by yourself at night?
And, I mean, I kind of work through. I mean, cautious. You know, when I'm in a strange place, I look around, and you know, I'm mindful of who's watching me, things like that. But I try and you know, I'm not going to barricade myself in the house with a gun. You know, wait for the apocalypse. No point in that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard sometimes to realize that it's not your fault that these things happen, because I think sometimes it's your natural instincts, you know, that I did something wrong. It was me that you know, and I just, like I said, I think it was a very brave book, and I'm very glad that you wrote this and let us see this. I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you very much.
The last comment that I want to make on this before we open it up to questions is I was kind of and this may be in my own head as well, but I was kind of impressed just how much that Joker voice is real, and like every time he opened his mouth in this book, I heard the character, and I heard Hamill's voice in particular.
Yes.
You know, whereas when every time the Batman spoke, I was like, yeah, that could be Conroy, maybe.
Yes.
You know, but the Joker's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
We all got
that wasn't superficial, right? I actually mean that. I literally mean that.
Well, the Joker in this story is interesting because he can't kill me. He can't physically harm me like the way he can just about anybody else. But he's more insidious. Missy and I have a very good friend named Mark Evanier, and Mark has you know, we've talked to him several times about people we've had some conflicts with, and Mark says, crazy people can't hurt you, but they can make you hurt yourself. Yeah. And that was what I kept in mind while writing the Joker, is that he can't gas me, he can't stab me in the, you know, or hurt me in the way he would another character. But by whispering in his ear, he's even more in my ear. He's even more destructive. You know, like, yeah, you know, order a pizza tonight, stay in. You know, why not? You deserve it. Why go? You don't want to go for a walk around the block and get some exercise, do you? No, there'd be trouble out there. So stay in. Just take it easy. Play some games. You know, it's that voice of temptation that we all struggle with, and it doesn't even have to be a villain. It's just the you know, we have this proclivity to go to the easy way, to seek out shelter and comfort and safety, and sometimes we shouldn't be. Sometimes we have to test ourselves. We have to throw ourselves out there, and we have to do things we don't want to do. And sometimes it's a bitch, and sometimes you do it and you come off a little bit better for it. So that voice, that inner voice of temptation, you know, that I depicted as the Joker, I think it's very real for all of us. And he just was such a natural to do that, because he's always smiling. He's always pretending he's got your best interests at heart. And you can't deny you know, when Mark does the character, he's funny, he's engaging, he's charismatic, he's friendly to a point. And then but you have to see him for what it is. And you have to realize that as hard as it is to deny yourself certain things, or to go another way, or to be tough with yourself, that way lies salvation.
Do you hear Hamill's voice too when you write it, or?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I'll even write to him sometimes, like, I wrote a great script for you. What am I doing? Oh, you're messing around with Lex Luthor. And it's like, oh, great. And so it's like, oh, good. That's going to be so much fun. And yeah, just recorded with something with him just about a week ago, and he was over in London, so we had to, you know, it was a weird time to try and get him, but you know, I was in the studio in Los Angeles, he was in London, and it's like, hey Mark, oh Paul, and, you know, it's just, he just sits down and he just starts getting into it, and it's wonderful. So I'm lucky that over the years we've become very friendly, and he's a wonderful soul and a very good guy. And there's some days I just wake up saying I'm going to write something for him just because it's going to be fun, and it always is. And he always gets it. And I remember that with this one script that I wrote for him, we were just like giggling in the recording studio. He was like, and he knows exactly how to do things in a certain inflection, because he's got in addition to being a terrific actor, he's got a huge knowledge of popular culture and everything. And at one point, the Joker kind of pops up suddenly behind somebody, and he goes, "Glad to see you." And Mark was, "Oh, Bilko," and I said, "Exactly." And he goes, "Glad to see you," because that was Phil Silver's catchphrase. So I wrote that in knowing exactly he would know exactly who that pertained to and exactly how to make the Joker delivery on it. And it's like one of those things we just sort of, throw in, do to amuse each other, because we're geeks, so or we're fans of old comedy and fun stuff like that. This is fun. So yeah,
awesome. All right, so I'd love to, because you guys must have questions. I assume you have questions. And let's throw it out. And I also want to remind everybody who's on the live stream. We have people on the live stream, right? Yeah, 3. There should be more than that. Oh, they're all here in the store.
Oh, yeah.
All right. But if you have questions too, ask them, and Doug will hand me a little piece of paper with them on them. So who's got a question? Put a hand up. Are you going to run the mic back? Yeah. I think you can just.
Hey, Paul, I love the book. Just had a quick question. When working on Batman the Animated Series or Justice League, was there any, aside from Death and Sandman, was there any other characters you would have liked to get in there that never had a chance to?
Death and Sandman, they were really the big one. I mean, that was the one that it pretty much as in the book, like a year before the incident in the book, I'd run into Neil at a comic convention, and I said, "Wouldn't it be fun to do this?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Do you want to write it?" He goes, "No, you go ahead." And it's like, he wasn't really letting people. He wasn't really allowing people other than himself to write Sandman, but this amused him to do it in a cartoon, and he thought it would be fun to see how it turned out. Unfortunately, we never got to do it, but I feel like the fact that, when I asked him about it recently, he said, "Sure, put it in the comic book." And I felt like, okay, now the story is out. And, thinking about it, I don't know if it would have made a really good half hour. We would have had to have added so much to it. It might not have, maybe Alan Burnett was right, but maybe we'll do it as a short someday. I don't know. We'll see about that. The only other character that we really fought hard for, we fought hard on 2 cases that we lost. One was Black Canary, because we wanted to do a Black Canary Catwoman team up. And this was after the first run of the episodes. It was still in the Batman animated style, not the New Adventure style. But this was one of the few times the network came down really hard on us. They said, every time we pitched them a story, their only question was, "Where's Robin?" We're doing the Adventures of Batman and Robin now. We have to see Robin in the story because we need to see more kids in the show. So when we had this Black Canary Catwoman team up, there was no Robin in the story, and they absolutely refused to greenlight that episode, unfortunately. And we also wanted to put in a character from the 80s called Nocturna, but they didn't. We wanted to do a vampire story, and they were dead set against a vampire story at that point. So we lost out on those 2.
Ask.
I actually had 2 questions.
Sure.
So, first one is, what was it like to work on the first 2 Arkham games?
Mhm.
And for the first question, and did you have any input in Arkham Knight? And the second one, it's actually a request, but.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll answer the first one first. I really enjoyed the first 2 games. I thought they were a lot of fun, and they were a tremendous amount of work, and it was a learning experience, how to tell a story and keep, a vital gameplay going, because the more I worked with it, the more I worked with Rocksteady, they would tell me things that I just didn't know, like, there are gamers out there who don't really know who Batman is, nor do they care. And I said, "Really? Doesn't everybody know Batman?" And they said, "Well, yeah, but you have to make this a game experience first, entertainment experience later, because gamers are not passive. They want to be in that world. They want to be shaping the outcome. And there are guys who live just to play games, and if they know Batman at all, they know, oh, he's a guy in a mask. So you have to write it from that point of view. You have to engage the gamer first, and then you bring what you need, what you know about Batman to kind of make it a whole experience. So it was a definite learning experience, but I was a pretty fast learner on the game. So when we got to the second one, I pretty much knew what I was doing. It was a lot of work though, because you're writing everything like about 4 or 5 different times for every line of dialogue. You have to write it. And poor Kevin is in there. He's like a month worth of dialogue where he's just going, "It went that way. I'm going around this way. I'll go down this way." Oof, ooh, ooh. The grunts and impact sounds alone probably just knocked the life out of the poor guy, but he's a trooper. He's the greatest. So even 3 hours of he was able to pull it off. What was the second part of the question?
So my girlfriend couldn't make it tonight, and she was like really jealous that I'm here.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could say hi to her real quick.
Yeah, what's her name?
Pilar.
Hi, Pilar. Hi, Pilar. We miss you. Where are you?
So did you play the Batman games yourself, or
No,
do you,
I wrote them, but I never played them. No, I stink at games. So what I do is I'll put in Arkham City and I'll just swing around like Batman, and I'm Batman. I'm going over this building. Oh, there's trouble over there. The police will take care of it. I'm just going to stay around. I just like being Batman. I just don't want to have to go down and fight anybody because I might lose. I'm the worst hero ever. Worst Batman ever.
So I was noticing in the book there was sort of a change in the artistic style at various points. I was wondering if that was something that you kind of set out to do. Was that something that happened with your collaboration with Eduardo, and why? I was trying to figure out when it changed and why. And
would that be in regards to the coloring or the
style? In some ways it was more realistic and sort of painterly, and then other times it got very more almost like Frank Miller, where it became very sort of graphic. And
I think those were changes. Some of that might be in the fact that it took 2 years to finish the book, so he might have changed a few things. But I also think that he was making conscious choices throughout the books to change his style in certain ways. I know he was doing that with the coloring in certain scenes. In some of the, you can almost tell when the scenes where the Joker is talking to the writer, that the Joker seems almost more vibrant colored, and the writer seems a little bit more drab. And he was doing that to get a contrast between the characters. And he did a lot of things with color that it was symbolism that was making a lot of sense to him at the time. And to the reader, it was very, you'd pick it up in an almost unconscious way. And I think that he was doing that with some of the changes he made in the artwork as the story went along. And some of the things I didn't even realize he was doing until I looked at the book, several times. I remember when I got the last page in, where I'm walking out with Harley, there's a blank. It's just blank there. And I was looking, I was going man, we're supposed to be walking out the door together. It's supposed to be, I'm walking out this, and I sent him reference. This is what the doors look like. And we're just sort of walking off together and off into the park, that let's end it in the real world. And then I set it aside and I looked at it again later and I thought, well, what he's really doing here is, this is sort of just walking off into something new. He didn't want to depict it as, I'm leaving the office. It's more like a change of mind, where that's what I'm taking with me. And I thought that was really kind of a very astute and empathetic thing to do.
Well, it's kind of nervous to ask it, but
Sure.
It's all good. So just to start off, animated and the animated series and The Simpsons, those are two things that when I saw on TV, I was glued as a kid to watch. So whenever it was on, it was just I have to watch it. I thought that was brilliant. And then when I read your comics, it was like a game changer, just like the anime series. It was always a game changer, every single medium that you did. And then when it went to the video games and I heard your name was, your name was popped up as one of the writers for Arkham Asylum.
Yeah.
I was telling all my friends that were gamers, dude, it's Paul Dini. They're like, who? And I'm like, oh man, you guys don't know what's gonna happen. I have to play this game.
Yeah.
Then look what happened, and then Arkham City too, game changer. Now that everyone, you know, they're doing Spider-Man and they're trying to copy
Sure.
how Arkham is. And so, when are you gonna do movies? I talked to, I don't know if you remember the guy Ronnie Del Carmen.
Oh yeah, I love
Yeah.
Ronnie.
Yeah,
And he mentioned you number one, and I totally agree. I was like, Paul Dini is one day I want to meet him, and I'm so glad that I got to meet you today. And I'm just like, you know, Ronnie Del Carmen did Up and what was the new one?
Inside Out.
Inside Out.
He's co-director of Inside Out. He's phenomenal
I mean,
storyteller.
You could do so much better. I mean, not saying that he was bad. I mean, come on, you changed the comics, you changed, you know, TV shows. When we're gonna do the movies, like they keep saying your name. Oh, Paul Dini was influenced directors, great director, Christopher Nolan. I'm like, okay, Nolan did his thing, but Paul Dini's still alive. Like, come on, man. Like,
Movies may come someday. I just haven't pursued them to any great degree. I actually just wrote a film script with a friend of mine, a longtime friend and occasional writing partner. We have it out there, and I don't know if I direct it, but it was a lot of fun writing with this old friend of mine, and it was science fiction, some fantasy, humor, a lot of action. We'd love it if it gets produced, but it's sort of making the rounds now to see who's doing that, and if that goes, maybe something like that. I had a brush with doing a Batman movie years ago, two brushes actually. They were going to make a Batman Beyond movie, and they brought in a director, and Alan Burnett and I were working with the director, and the scripting process didn't go very well, and the director, the studio wanted a lot of changes, and the director said, "That's it. I'm not going to change it. We either shoot it as written or I walk." And it was the first draft, and the first draft is always changed. And he just the studio wanted to give notes, and I wanted to take the notes because I wasn't even sure about what we'd put in there, and I thought it could be a lot stronger. But the director walked, and that was sort of the end of that project. And Alan and myself, owed Warner's a draft of something, so we said, let's write a traditional Batman movie. And it was hard kind of dealing with where the studio was at that time, because Batman and Robin had come out, and that wasn't very well received as they wanted, and they were really kind of down on Batman at the moment. And I said, well, and I tried explaining, it's like, okay, well, in Bond movies, there's a man with the golden gun, which wasn't all that great, and then they did The Spy Who Loved Me, which everybody loved. So let's do our Spy Who Loved Me. Let's do a little bit more of a serious Batman movie. Let's not worry about too much about the freaky villains. Let's just bring in one adversary and do kind of a strong story about Bruce Wayne. And they were kind of on the fence about it. We pitched a few ideas, and then they came to us originally with the Superman versus Batman idea. They had some ideas about that. We worked with them on it, and again, it was not a big priority for them, and we kept running into roadblocks. And I think had they been more anxious to make the movie at that time, we could have made it work. But it was just one of those things that they sort of had simmering on the back burner, and it eventually fizzled out when we went away. And I thought, if that's what it is, I kind of don't want to do it. So, and I'd rather see at this point a good Batman movie than attempt to write one.
Wait, actually, I want to follow up really fast on that, just really fast. Is there a difference when you're writing episodic fiction versus something that you have to stand alone?
Yeah, and this is why the movies are such a dicey proposition, not for myself, but for anybody who tackles them, because you can write the character every month and come up with these great stories for whichever, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Batman, anybody, and you have as a writer, you have a great handle on the world and on the character and on the on where the world is at that point. And then when you're writing a movie, which is going to be a much more general entertainment, you have many more masters to serve, and there's always the inclination to go back to square one and say, okay, I'm doing a movie about this character. Now I have to go kind of retell the story about the character. I have to take everything that's known about this whole character's history and condense it into about 100 minutes. And that will sometimes involve going over old ground, going over old story material, because a lot of times the studio will think, well, we have to bring the audience up to date. We have to put everybody on the same page. Whereas, you know, in some of the Marvel movies, I think they've been luckier in the fact that they know their audience, or they know that they can bring the audience up to speed very quickly just by, you know, okay, this is Iron Man, this is who he is, and here's an adventure, and go. So every studio is different, and with these characters, it's easier once the character is up and running to do infinite variations on the theme than try and recreate it again for, you know, completely for a new audience, and basically tell the same old stories.
How many times have you told Batman's origin?
I don't know, here and there. I mean, the only time I ever thought I really, well, there was that time with Alex Ross for the double page story, and I said it here and there. You know, I never really want to go back over that, because it's like, okay, we all know that kid crying in the alley and his dead parents. Okay, move on.
Seems like they do it all the time.
Yeah.
Charlie.
Yeah, hey, I had a couple really quick questions. First of all, I loved the show Tower Prep, and I was wondering what happened with that, and what did you have planned for that, and what was in your...
Oh, thank you. Tower Prep was a show I did for Cartoon Network. We did 13 episodes of a live action series. It was it's a rather frustrating endeavor, because at that point, Cartoon Network wanted to get into live programming for kids, skewing mostly toward boys, doing mostly like hour-long adventures. And what happened was they went in with this commitment to do the shows, and then kids went online and started making videos like, don't change Cartoon Network. We are, you know, don't kill Scooby-Doo. Don't take off Tom and Jerry. Cartoon Network is Cartoon Network. And I remember, you know, and there were a handful of these kids doing that. And I remember an executive, you know, coming into a Tower Prep meeting going like, you saw what these kids are saying? They don't mean that, do they? No, of course. No, we're still, no, just a couple of kids. You know, then I could see it in their face. They were terrified that they had alienated their audience. And at that point, the writing was on the wall. They had made this foray, and then they got out of it just as quickly. And even though everybody really, you know, a lot of people who saw Tower Prep really liked it. I remember, you know, another nail in the coffin was we were at San Diego Con, and we showed part of an episode, and the audience was really into it. And a mother got up with her daughter and said, I'm amazed. That's the show I want to watch with my kids. And I looked over, and the Cartoon Network execs were going, oh, because boys, we need boys watching. We don't want families. We don't want moms. We don't want girls. And it's like, and half the show was a female cast and very strong characters. And they ran in fear of it. They canceled the show. And then later on, they got deluged with letters. And a year ago, the head of Cartoon Network said to me, we still get letters on that show. And I said, you going to revive it? He goes, no. No, because they've set, you know, what happened also was Adventure Time came around the same time, and they just said, oh, look at these ratings on Adventure Time. Man, we're out of live action. You know, and you know, live action, you know, Adventure Time's a great show, and it has a huge fan following and everything, but they felt only one will live. So that was it.
You got a second, Charlie?
That was it. And what were we going to do? Oh, we were going to send the kids back and lead a rebellion, and there was going to be more dupliciousness and stuff like that. They were going to actually, you know, we can escape or we can go back, and you know, we had to keep the show going another year, so they were going to go back and recruit more rebels. But at that point, they sort of knew how to get in and out, and so that was going to factor in.
So my other question was just, you know, and I apologize if this is a little bit of a weird question,
Sure.
but how do you feel now about like the domestic violence kind of stuff in like Mad Love? Like, what kind of conversations have you had about that? How do you feel like that's shaped the character of Harley as she's portrayed now?
Well, I feel like I wouldn't send her back there to be the Joker's, you know, hench person in any way, shape, or form. If I was going to write new stories about her, I feel that what we did in Mad Love was more of an exploration of bad choices a tragic character made. And I felt like, you know, and I feel in time that has sort of come to work against us a bit, perhaps because Harley has become such a character, an independent character, and away from that type, that people who only know her from her more recent appearances see her as this confident, happy-go-lucky screwball. And when they some people have read Mad Love, and they said, gee, that's awful. You know, why would you subject her to that? And it's like, well, that's where she came from, and she had this. This is the evolution of a villain. This is somebody who kind of wasn't that nice to begin with in a lot of ways, and her own hubris sort of led her down that path, and she suffered as a result of that. That's where we leave her at the end of that story. But then I think, you go on and the character evolves from that. And so I wouldn't go back and repeat the past. I would not make her a victim. I would make her, this is where I was, that's where I'm going, and that's where I'll be. So.
I'm gonna kind of project.
Do it.
So what I loved about The Dark Knight was that you, during the experience, you question yourself afterwards. Why didn't I yell? Why didn't I scream? Why didn't I try to fight back? And as you put so eloquently tonight, like Kuna, they just wanted to beat someone up. They just really mean people, evil people, and that's just what they were out for. And it's, when the book was described at the beginning, they said, the Great Cloud, they said, it's about, redemption or healing with Batman. And so I was kind of expecting that within the moment, the assault itself, that Batman would be there. But in fact, it was just, like you said, just get through it. And kind of we touched around with, domestic abuse and assault against women a little bit. It's kind of a similar advice. It's either struggle really hard at the beginning, or if you feel this is going real south, just don't get killed, right? You can get surgery afterwards, just like don't die. And what really, so I thought that your approach to assault was great because it wasn't macho in the way Batman sometimes is. It's not gruff. It's not, I will take every punch and I will skip my few in. It was like, nope, gotta live, gotta survive. Hopefully I can. And what I thought was great was afterwards, the healing that happened with Batman. And you even had, what I love is the meta layers that you had where Batman was your death in a way, and that whole thing. And I thought that was just great. It was a refreshing take on assault, especially from, man, writes Batman. You think, okay, Scott, he probably landed a few punches. Like, no, I lived.
I know when I can win a fight, and I know when I'm going to lose, and I know when I'm in for it. And more experience than that has taught me how to, when I've been in a tight situation, that there's a way you can win and there's a way you can't win, and sometimes you just have to take your survival as a win and go from there.
I had a second. That wasn't really a question. That was just don't look too deeply for a question in there. But what I thought was interesting also was the memories that you decided to pull out. The drawings were great, and kind of the doodle sketches, and then how that evolves with you as we age. But what I thought was interesting was the Nevada scene with your brother.
Yes.
And that to me, just projecting my own personality, seems almost more of a traumatic experience to tell to the world, right? Like I could have shot my brother if I was more reckless. This sort of stories happen all the time. And I wondered if there was any sort of cherry picking with the stories that you told that were brought up because of the assault, and was there any that you decided, well, don't tell them, but what were there any that you decided not to because it was a little too raw still?
In putting the story together, I went for moments that I felt that were real moments that really happened to me, that were part of my experience, that either helped tell the story or that reflected back on why things happened. Like the Nevada story was something that happened years before most of the incidents in the book, but when I was actually at the gun range, it's all I could think about. So that's what led to that story. The Emmy scene had to be in there because where does a guy develop such a low self-opinion of himself that he allows himself to treat himself like this and other people to treat himself? And when the world, I have to show that. And I did not want to show that. And it took a long conversation with Alan Burnett before I saw, okay, this has merit. It's like, that's the smoking gun. That has to be there as a clear indication of what this guy's path is and where he goes and how he this is what I do to myself without even thinking about it, within the depths of bathos. And then here's something that really happens, and here's real tragedy. And okay, where do you go from there? You know, so not every incident was in there. There were incidents with friends that I left out. There were and coworkers. There were a few things that I sort of ran together, but I felt everything was in service of telling the story and moving it as a narrative, that I didn't want to take too many detours. But the Nevada one was a very important one. And it was an image that just it haunts me to this day.
Do you keep a separation still? Because you answered that question. You said that guy.
Yeah.
It's not that guy.
Well,
no, I'm just trying. I mean,
I've said this before. I think of this a lot of the times. I think of the story as like the ending of Pinocchio, not the Disney version, but Carlo Collodi's original story, where after a long time of going to school, and he's long had these adventures with, you know, the fox and the cat and the big fish and the blue fairy and everything. He's home and he's going to school and he's working and he's running errands, and it takes him a long time, but you know, eventually he wakes up one day and he's real and goes, oh boy, I'm glad I'm not that guy. And he looks over in the corner and there's this old puppet just sort of sitting there. So that's sort of the attitude I took with it. Glad I'm not that guy anymore. I am, but I'm not. So.
Yeah.
This is sort of related to what we were just talking about, but there are parts where pretty explicitly you talk about it being a story of like redemption and resilience and coming back and everything. But there are also parts where you're pretty self-deprecating.
Yeah.
Not in like the bathos way you were talking about, but just like for real saying like,
Sure.
I know I'm not, you know, greater than I am.
Yeah.
So can you maybe talk about that experience of kind of finding the right balance between those two sort of orientations of telling the story?
All I can say is I think that I was going on instinct, and I didn't really have a plan, and I just sort of felt with my heart the way I should tell the story, and I didn't plan to tell the story. You know, it was something I couldn't plan on. I just felt like in for a penny, in for a pound. This is the story I'm telling, and I'm just going to kind of like dive into a pool and do it all at once. And I think the fact that it's connected or resonated or that just people got it told me that I kind of made the right decision going that way. But I can't explain the choices I made. I just sort of did them. It got to be instinctive after a while. So, you know, kind of like close my eyes and throw the dart, hope it hits the board somewhere.
How is your writing process? Like you think of a story, like, oh my God, like I have a story about that, like Ra's al Ghul ripping out Batman, taking away his fortune, and you kind of, and then Batman's like forced to like, you know, like make his own batarangs and make his own mask. How would you get a story from your mind into process? Like
a lot of times when you work on a character that other people own, basically, you're putting that character into a pre-existing format, whether it's going to be a cartoon or a book or comic. And knowing that I'm going to tell the story to begin with kind of dictates how I tell the story and where I want it to go with. So if I'm going to do a Batman story for a half hour of animation, I know that it's going to be, you know, it's going to have a lot of action in it. It's going to have, you know, some drama, some comedy in it, some things like that. And I start plotting accordingly. I never write anything just for the sake of writing it, you know, or at least not with Batman, because I know that it's going to be published or produced. So I try and think of what am I doing in what format, and then what's the story that best suits the way of what's the form I can best tell that story in. So if it's going to be a comic book, I know that I can have a lot more time with dialogue with Bruce Wayne, with different characters, because I don't have to worry about or any recording limit, and I can be as verbal or not as I choose to be, as long as I tell the story. But for, you know, it also depends on what do I have in my mind, and what kind of a story do I want to tell? If I want to tell an upbeat story, then I have a way of doing that. If it's going to be a more dramatic story, then I take that way of telling the story. But it's just, print. It comes down to print versus animation for me in a lot of cases. And where I want to be a little bit more introspective and take my time with the story, I usually choose print to tell that story. Whereas for animation, I want to put something out on its feet pretty quickly and start the action and then bring in moments of character or drama throughout as the action's happening. So it all depends on what medium I'm working in.
Do you always figure it ahead of time, or have you had a situation where you started writing something for one medium, the other, gotten 10% into it and gone, no, this is I picked the wrong one?
Well, yeah, I'd say that happened more with the comics. When I would write something, I'd start off writing something that I felt would make a good Batman story, and then I realized I was writing something that was a little too thin. There's something that if there was music and sound effects and action, it would be a great half hour. But I'm looking at this, and it's not moving me in any way. It's just I could do better if I'm telling a story where I can actually get into the character's head a little bit and make him interact with other people. So I'll start again, put it aside and do something else.
Seth in the back.
So we all know about your well-lauded history. You've got Emmys and Eisners and all kinds of awards, and you've worked in all kinds of mediums. And you're an expert in your field. What currently challenges you as a writer?
To do original stories and with original characters. I've been trying to write a novel for a while, like a children's novel, and I found that very challenging because it's a different way. It's completely different from anything I've really tried. I've written a few short stories here and there, but actually coming up with an idea for, I have the whole story in my head and the characters and what they do, and then just sitting down and writing a chapter, I'm going like, I've never even attempted anything like this before, and moving the characters from one place to another and getting getting them to say what I want them to say is just different. And it's a learning process and something that, I haven't had as much time, been able to devote as much time to because I'm just busy on other things. So I'll haul out the story that I've been working on and write a chapter or two and look at it and kind of going like, well, I don't know. I'll read it next month and see how I like it. So something like that is, it's storytelling. It's still characters, and it's the same, but it's different. And that was what publishers told me when I met with them originally about the story. Is they said, well, write a few chapters and see how it feels. And so it's different. I'm not saying that I can't do it or I can't crack it, but I have to spend more time with it. And lately, I just haven't been able to do it.
Well, Brian K. Vaughan just gave an interview, I think earlier this week or last week that was published. And at the end of it, he says that he thinks that what comics creators should be doing more of is their own characters.
Right.
Once they've gotten their foothold and they've done their superhero books and gotten that out of their system, they should move on to original creations. And I think it's very, very interesting that you articulated a very similar point of view there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that creation of characters brings a tremendous amount of freedom and potentially greater rewards. It brings a great personal satisfaction to see a character you created come to life in a book or when you create a TV show or something like that. And it also it'll benefit you spiritually to see that character exist, and also possibly financially if you have a character that goes on and becomes popular and you're able to make a career out of doing that. I mean, when I was younger, I thought comic strip guys were the luckiest guys in the world because somebody like Charles Schultz had a great idea with Peanuts, and now he can sit there and draw Snoopy and Charlie Brown and all those characters, and every strip cartoonist I just loved, and I thought they were so lucky because they got to decide what they wanted to do. They created a little universe, and they got to go in and play in that universe every day. And Batman and the Justice League, everything like that is great. But you know, that's a foundation that's kind of built on sand. You know, you can have the assignment for a year or two, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you're playing in a sandbox with somebody else's toys, and the big kids could come in at any minute and take them away. So it's better off if you have your own toys and nobody takes those away from you. I think.
Here, here.
This goes a couple of questions back. Back on the potential Batman Beyond movie.
Yes.
What villain were you guys planning to use, and what was it, like a continuation or like a reboot?
On the Batman Beyond movie, or okay, Batman Beyond movie was, I think we were going to use Derek Powers, you know, and the Joker. You know, they were in there to varying degrees, but it really was, it was kind of neither fish nor fowl, and I didn't much care for the story because it was too much. Batman Beyond was the midpoint, and it should have opened with him. It was more like Bruce Wayne in the declining years, and then somewhere in the middle of Act 2, Batman Beyond shows up and we're in the future. And then I'm going like, can we maybe make Batman not in the movie? Can maybe we have Terry McGinnis at the very beginning, and then we kind of explain as we go along how this happened, so that we're up and running in the future in this really interesting time, and we're not rehashing bits of the Burton movies, bits of the Frank Miller's Dark Knight, bits of other things that, you know, are kind of put together piecemeal to get us into the future. And so that was the basic problem I had with it. And, you know, to some degree, Derek Powers was in it, and the Joker was in it, and some very familiar elements and some elements I just didn't care for. But at that point, we were kind of invited in to write, and it really didn't begin with us. It began with the director, and he was calling the shots. And so when he left, the project sort of evaporated.
So this is kind of veering off of just Batman,
sure,
specifically. But what did you think about the show Young Justice? And do you believe that there is any possibility of it coming back? And also, again, just what did you think of it? If you caught it.
Well, I thought it was a very good show, and I thought it was a very earnest show, and I thought visually that it kind of nodded toward the Bruce Timm style, but it had taken it in a different way, in something that was much more, I hate to say this, more like a traditionally designed superhero show, but I think that it was done with care and craftsmanship, so it really distinguishes itself visually as a very good looking show, very handsome looking show. And I felt that the choices they made with the characters were very strong and very engaging. And it was something, when I watched it, it had a natural, there was a natural attraction to build an audience there. And it was done, like I said, it was done with care and intelligence and good humor, so that it was sort of a natural. And I can't really speak too much of the show because I was never really involved with it, and I only know it from watching, you know, a bunch of episodes. So I'm not the person to say about, you know, its destiny or what happened. But watching from the outside, I could only say that the audience exists for that show. The network did not exist for that show because the demand, the networks change over time. And they say, you know, we're skewing younger, and there's no place on our schedule for shows that are anything other than what we want to do, and it really has nothing to do with ratings or the appeal of the show or the characters or the fans of the show. This is where we want to be, and we're going to be there, and we're in control, so we will be there. And that's the mindset I ran into on Tower Prep. And they just said, well, we're doing this because we call the shots. And Cartoon Network is very much its own animal, and they can chart its own destiny however they see fit. So, I mean, it would be great if Young Justice or shows like that could come back, because I think that there is an audience that likes the depths of character, that likes the continuity they've established, that likes, you know, the inherent drama. A lot of those same elements are in shows like Steven Universe and Adventure Time, but the design is so different that I think it's people think it skews younger, but actually the tone of writing in a lot of those shows is very similar to what Young Justice was doing. Again, I can't say anything more than what I've observed, but you know, other than the fact that yeah, it would be nice to see that back again. It was a really good show.
Do you think that animation does justice to episodic stories told over the course of a season, or do you think that it's difficult just because of the nature of the medium to do that kind of a story?
Well, there are a lot of theories about that, and it's kind of hard to prove it one way or another. But what I've always heard, or you know, said rather defensively, is that action adventure doesn't repeat as well as comedy, because once you know how the conflict is solved, once you know how the villain is defeated, you've seen all the big action bits. The audience, and again, you know, we're talking about an audience that is usually portrayed as being 4 to 9, has lost interest. They don't want to sit through it again. They're off playing games, or they're flipping channels. So that's why I think that there is more resistance to doing more involved drama shows that have a continuity, because the perception is now the audience, and this is not what I believe, but this is a lot of the prevailing theory, is the audience for action adventure is primarily male, primarily young, with an attention span like that. If the name hero is not on screen throughout the entire episode, and if the action is not nonstop, the boy is going to change the channel, or he's going to turn on a video game, and we've lost the audience. Every once in a while, networks go through theories like that, and and who's to say they're entirely wrong? I mean, they do their studies, and they can read them any way they want. But the theory is now that comedy is much more attractive, because you don't get all the gags necessarily through the first time, so comedy repeats better. So you know, that's what I run into a lot. And again, you come across shows that have a tremendous amount of appeal that the audience just wants to watch again and again, regardless if they know the story or not. And there's a lot of comedy that just is color and noise and is just forgotten the second it runs. So I don't know.
I was wondering to know more about Batman Beyond. I mean, I felt like it's probably like a show, and it seemed to end suddenly with the second season.
Well, you know, again, you know, it's.
Every Saturday morning, kids WB, watch that. And, remember the last episode before that whole resolution of the Justice League?
Yeah.
About the egg baby.
Yeah.
Like it just started. I was just curious as to what the challenges were of writing.
Well, you know, it is a business, and a lot of times animation shows are birthed with they're like mayflies. They only live so long. And, you know, it can be a great show, but if the order is for 52, once you hit 52, off you go, because they need to refresh the brand a little bit. You can do and the show can be great, and you love the adventures, and then once the people in charge say, well, you know, we've sold as much product as we can, this iteration of the hero, we can run these 52 episodes on Netflix, that we've got enough. They stop the show, and then a year later, same hero, different show, different group, different cast doing the voices, different creators. It's just a way of refreshing it, and that show could be not anywhere near as good as the previous iteration, but that's the way it is. This is the beast that is kiddie animation, for lack of a better term. The rules do not apply on something like Bob's Burgers or Simpsons, because those are treated much more like a sitcom, but for the daytime shows. Unfortunately, find people delivering superior product in a medium that only has mediocrity, or, you know, a lot of the same. So, I mean, I hate to be down on everything, but, you know, that is the killer of our business, is that we could have a great show, but if we hit 52 or hit 65, whatever, there's very, very little chance for it to be renewed. SpongeBob and A few others are the big exceptions, but that's kind of the way it goes.
If you created a television studio and gave you full creative control, would you join and make a show?
Would I make a show?
And I said, if we hypothetically had our own studio to do whatever we wanted with, and you had full creative control, do you think that would be like enough to make a show successful in some ways, or do you think there's still?
I think at some point, like that was the goal of Nickelodeon originally, was to just do shows and great shows and then just run them for however long. And I think with a show like SpongeBob, they continue to do stuff like that. I think that at some point, it'd be great to do a show and just keep going and going and going. And at some point, you reach the point where I can rerun the show forever, because I've got over 100 episodes. And is the concept holding up? Have we exhausted everything? Are the characters just more of a chore right now than a joy? And at that point, that's what most shows I think should stop. But yeah, sure, it'd be great to just do dream projects and have them run as long as you want or as short as they want. There are some great shows that only run 10 episodes and they're done, and everything you say, a lot of the shows on cable are like that. The season is only like 10 episodes, and then a year later they'll do more episodes, stuff like that. So the rules for TV have really changed, and I think they're going to be changing for animation on cable as well.
One of the things that you worked on that I've always really, really loved was kind of going back to Batman Beyond, the Return of the Joker movie. And that always stuck out in my brain when I was younger, because it was the first time I really remembered those DC animated shows getting like really, really dark with like the Tim Drake stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess I have two questions coming off of that. Is like, what kind of sparked that turn in tone? Because it also feels like a lot of the stuff that's come since then, especially in the animated movies, has had a lot of those darker elements. And then also, I guess I was just always curious if you ever got like creative pushback from doing these very weird things with the established characters. Like for a long time, I assumed that it was just going to be continuity, that the character of Tim Drake becomes this like weird Joker thing.
Right.
Because I didn't understand the differences in comic continuity versus DC or animated continuity at the time.
Well, we would get pushback from strange places. Usually, DC, all through the years, has been a really tremendous collaborator, and we really work hand in glove with them on a lot of the animation stuff now. There's actually a few people who work both with DC and with the animation division, who know the characters back and forth, who really, keep the lines of communication open and contribute a lot creatively. So we're on the same page with DC in a lot of ways. And when we're not, or when there is conflict, it's really quickly resolved, because we'll sit down and have a fast, détente about it. And it's always resolved very, very peaceably, because we all know the characters, we all love the characters, and we want the same thing out of them. So there's less now. The pushback that we would have on shows on like Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker, there was it was a hard process, and there was a big controversy when we released the movie, because we had to cut and rework the movie in a few scenes before it could be released. Ultimately, we did release an uncut version the way we wanted to do it, and I think that's the version that stands now. But what happened, it was really a very double-edged sword. When we started the creation process on that movie, we were told by Warner Brothers, make the Batman movie you want. All right, think of this as if we're going to allow you to make a live-action Batman Beyond movie, and make this as hard and as dark and as dramatic as you want to make it. And we are going to, put it in theaters, and then we're going to put it on video. It's going to have a theatrical release. We had a big kickoff party for the movie when we started production, and I went ahead and wrote the script I wanted to write, and Bruce, Tim, and Gort, and Glenn Murakami and I all jammed on the story, and then I wrote the script, and we got the okay from everybody to make the movie that we wanted. Well, business intruded upon it at some point, because what happened was we got the movie made. but a lot of the plans for the marketing of the movie changed drastically. We did not get the theatrical exposure that we wanted. We did not get a lot of the support that we needed from various elements that we were looking for that would have supported it being that dark a movie. Ultimately, the movie fell under the watchful eye of the people doing the Saturday morning show, the network people. And the network people, as bizarre as it seems, wound up with making the final decision on the movie. And they said, this is not something that we would run on our show, on our Saturday morning schedule, so we can't really promote this the same way. So you're going to have to change it. So we had to go in and we had to make changes to suit them, with the win being that, okay, this is the version that's going to get released initially, that they feel they can put on TV. In 6 months, you can release the version that you wanted to do. So it was a bitter pill that things changed that way, but that's the nature of the business in the animation, in the animation game. There are very few places making theatrical animation that just can take something from creative inception to presentation. And I think Disney does that, DreamWorks does that. And because they're set up for it. Disney does it like, nobody's business. And in this situation, it was, it was just hard drumming up the support internally for it. And ultimately we had to make those changes to satisfy the network. And the win was that we were able to ultimately release the version that we wanted to. So it was hard having to change anything in that story, but yeah, that's what you got to do sometimes. I'd rather do that than just not do it at all. Yeah.
So we're pretty much at 2 hours here, which means we probably should start closing this down. I actually kind of want to call you out in particular because you're the youngest member here. Do you have a question as the youngest guy here that you'd like to ask Paul?
Not really.
No? Okay. Well, I figured I'd give you the shot at least. All right. Does anybody have one last question? Seth in the back.
Sorry, one more.
Yeah.
Let's imagine you've been put in charge of, say, a major comic book publisher that specializes in superheroes. What would you do differently?
Quit. No!
There are other people who do that job better than I could. What would I do? I don't know. I would do the best executive advice I ever, or what was that?
Don't worry about it.
Okay. The best management technique I ever saw was practiced by Gene McCurdy, who started off Warner Brothers Animation in the early 90s with Tiny Toons. And she was the executive that got Tiny Toons going, that got Batman going and everything. And her strength was she found people who were very passionate and very smart about certain things that they loved, certain characters, certain animation styles, and she gave them the autonomy to do what they loved. And then she sat back and let them do it. And if there was conflict or if there needed a decision to be made, she would get involved, but she would say, you guys go, I trust you, I've given you this job, you have a lot of responsibility, you have a lot of money, you have a lot of talent at your disposal, and you have the passion and the intelligence and the spark to make this show, you do it. And I would do something like that. Similar, I would run the company with, you guys are the creative team on this character, you guys are on this character. I want to get together with you every once in a while to find out where you are and where you guys are, have to dovetail. But beyond that, I just want to read the books and I want them to be good. You guys go and do it. So I would deed the creative control to the people who most wanted it, who were most passionate about it, and let them do their work.
Here.
Yeah.
Here. All right. Well, so look, I want to thank you for coming out here and talking to us.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for this treasure.
Oh, sure.
This is fantastic stuff, and I think I speak for us all that, it really touched us.
Oh, thank you.
And it's great stuff.
So
yeah. And I just want to remind everybody that the next meeting of the book club is 7/27. We have Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda for Monstrous, which is a fantastic book if you have not been reading the serialization. Oh my God, you are going to cry when you read it. I hope that we get this same turnout for them because Sana's coming all the way from Japan to be here. So yeah, you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. So hopefully we'll see you all then. Thank you so much for coming out. And thank you very much, Paul Dini.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks, everybody.